So, you spent your career measuring how ecosystems exchange carbon and water with the atmosphere. If one of your friends or someone had no idea what that meant, how would you explain it in a few sentences?
I think the easiest set of words I use is breathing of the biosphere. Plants need to take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and use that to build sugars that are storing energy from sunlight, which will then power their life, essentially. So that's kind of the simplest way to put it. Another colleague of mine wrote a book called Eating the Sun. Plants essentially eat sunlight and they eat the CO2 and convert it into stored chemical energy compounds. The sugar, like you eat a candy bar or a hamburger.
So, you've spent a lot of time measuring greenhouse gas fluxes. Was there a specific measurement or moment early on that made you think that this was something that you wanted to spend your life studying?
Yeah, I think from the very beginning, I guess since I was trained in atmospheric sciences, we have a background in both physics and biology. And a lot of colleagues were just measuring concentrations in the atmosphere. Like if you're looking at your bathtub, what's the level of water in that bathtub? I want to understand how the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere changes and why. Requires that we measure the fluxes, whether it's the fluxes of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through respiration or the carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere through both plant, soil, and microbial respiration. And then on the background, we have all this fossil fuel combustion that's going on. But just thinking of it in terms of the biosphere, fluxes are the currency and the way we need to study this stuff. And a lot of different fields don't have the same skills that us as micrometeorologists have. So it brought in a different niche, a different tool that others didn't have. It was fun.
All right. What do you think the biggest misconception people have about how forests and wetlands actually affect climate change?
Ooh, that's, that, that's a hard one. Maybe they're not as effective as they think they are. I still remember years ago going to the airport, there was this idea that people would buy a tree and offset the carbon dioxide emissions from the fossil fuels. And how you add up all the carbon in the trees is much different than the amount of carbon dioxide we emit into the atmosphere, fossil fuel combustion. There's a lot of feedbacks, a lot of unintended consequences. For example, I'm working on wetlands. Wetlands are interesting because they can be some of the most efficient sinks of carbon dioxide. They take up carbon dioxide at very high rates. And because they're flooded, their root system and soil systems are not exposed to oxygen. And so they don't respire as much because the way to eat those compounds are taken by other types of microbes, and so they're less efficient essentially. But the problem is the microbes that do consume those carbon compounds actually produce methane, which is a much stronger greenhouse gas. This is kind of an example of try to turn one knob on the biosphere and maximize carbon dioxide inputs. You turn another knob and you try to reduce the carbon dioxide outputs through respiration, but then you open up a new knob that causes methane to come out. So this is why we study whole systems in complex manners.
Can you give me one concrete finding from your research, a number, a place, a specific ecosystem that you think people need to hear, know a little bit more about?
I'm a Californian, and we're really interested in looking at the role of rainfall and the lack of rainfall on how effective ecosystems and plants are for conducting photosynthesis and their seasonality. A couple of things we found is one is we were surprised in the summertime when it's very dry, we may get these periodic rain events. What's happening is the microbes have been sleeping all summer. They're not doing much, but that instant rain event wakes them up immediately. And what's happened all summer is that the sun has been breaking down the organic matter, the stems of the dead grass. And this is what's called photodegradation. And so it has changed the complexity of the carbon that's to be eaten by the microbes from a recalcitrant, hard to eat, very chewy, to something very easy to eat, something very digestible. And so we get these huge pulses of carbon dioxide coming out of the ecosystem after these rain events. That totally surprised us because lots of people don't make continuous measurements like we were doing. People would just go out into the field with a chamber, put it over the soil, and measure the carbon dioxide going in and out of the chamber. And often they just did it on sunny days, a few days a week. And by having continuous measurements, we saw these new events. The other thing was we found that there's up to a month difference in how soon or how late the spring growing season starts. Are the leaves coming out in New Jersey right now yet?
Yeah, so we're in full spring swing. Like our temperatures are at like 75 right now.
You're young. Is this an early spring you would
So
recall?
for us, it was an incredibly harsh winter. We had a
Mhm.
few weeks where it was like in the near negative degrees.
Uh,
And it's around like a mid to late spring for us.
our spring is we had a rainless March and our spring is about 2 or 3 weeks earlier this year. What we found is that the timing of leaf out happens when the soil temperature warms up enough to be about the mean annual air temperature. So essentially, the plants have kind of tuned themselves not to leaf out too early or too late. And by making these long-term measurements, we were able to see this with, especially with deciduous temperate forests. That was kind of a fun, exciting thing. Those are two.
What's the most important thing, in your opinion, happening in ecosystem science now that's not getting enough attention?
I think it's starting to get attention, but this role with these microbes, it takes a whole different set of skills. When I started out, we were mostly trying to merge skills from a meteorologist, ecologist, and a plant physiologist, understanding how water moves up the veins of the stems, how these little pores on leaves called stomata open and close, and how dry soils will cause these things to gradually shut down. Now what's happening is the rates of soil respiration often depend on to what degree phloem can have carbon exudates outside the roots, because the microbes don't move very much, so they kind of have to be where they are. And so we see a lot of connection between the rate of soil respiration and decomposition and plant photosynthesis. Now, what we don't know is what microbes are doing. It's how many are there, how they compete with other types of microbes. So really understanding this connection with soil microbiology is really the future that needs to be worked on more. So,
Yeah.
and that's outside my skill
Yeah.
sets. To be honest.
It's funny that you mentioned microbes because I had a long conversation with the scientist last week from one of the West Coast universities we'd spent a good amount of time talking about his research in microbes and how important they are to the ecosystem. So it was great to hear another person mention.
Yeah, there's new tools now with RNA and DNA. They can study these things a lot better than we used to. The thing is, it's hard to sample and it takes a lot of work to process the data. So you may not get the continuous time series we are getting right now by measuring things like temperature and carbon dioxide.
Speaking about 10, 15 years, if nothing changes in how we manage land and all these ecosystems globally and in the US, what is going to happen? What's going to that actually look like
Oh
in 10
boy.
years?
I'm scared of seeing these extreme persistent weather events that are really harmful to plants. So it's hard to say. So I think we're doing an unprecedented experiment that we shouldn't be doing. This leads to other colleagues. I went to a seminar this last week on geoengineering. To what degree should we do research on geoengineering or not? It's very controversial and has lots of these unintended consequences by doing it. To me, the best geoengineering is to decarbonize our energy system and go more solar, go more wind. We have batteries now that we didn't have before. So a lot of the concerns that, oh, it's difficult to do things solar or less of an issue. I think my household is almost not on hour by hour, but on a yearly basis. We are actually producing more solar energy and storing it in batteries than we're actually using with our cars and our house and stuff. So I think we've been pretty close to being decarbonized family, two of us.
On a 1 to 5 scale, 5 being the most, how urgent do you think this ecosystem carbon crisis is right now and why?
I guess I give it a five. We should have done stuff 20, 30 years ago. Understanding human nature and how people can be lied to and misinformed and are happy to follow these things. To me, that's a harder solution than just doing the research. I think we know quite a bit about all this stuff. It's getting humans to act in the right way is the hardest thing. And
Are there any, if you could give me one scientist you think I should interview after you, who would it be?
there's several scientists that are really active in social media, especially experts in climate. They're probably really busy. Michael Mann is one who's been doing a lot on climate and quite an activist. If you're interested in solar energy and decarbonization, a guy named Mark Jacobson at Stanford has been kind of a leader in this field. I follow him in Blue Sky, and so he might be able to tell you more about the technologies on this. We haven't talked about water. We talk a lot about carbon, but all of these rates of carbon uptake are all scaled with water and water availability and whether there's droughts or floods and how that affects the plant's ability to do this work. And that's a big challenge.
I have one more question. If every teenager on Earth had to hear one last sentence, one message from you to the world, what would it be?
Oh boy. I wish there was more teenagers like you. I'm impressed with your maturity and curiosity and your initiatives. I think you'll be a good role model. I hope more can learn from you.
I really appreciate you spending the time to take 15, 20 minutes out of your day. I'll be in contact pretty soon. Thank you.
You're welcome. I think more of us should do this. It doesn't take that much time, and we are educators. So I think it's important to talk to different people and try to communicate as well as we can. So hopefully you can spread the word, and I like your philosophy on this. So good luck.
Thank you.